Hey now, it's Sharon and I'm back to share another policing experience with you guys. If you're new to the channel, I'm a retired detective. I worked for 20 years for a southeastern city in the US, and I was also in the military. I'm sharing my experiences along with my perspective in hope of helping other folks in similar situations, or just to help you see it a different way, my way in which I experienced it. And with that being said, I just wanted to make a correction from last week's video when I said black and brown people were the majority poor people. In the city that I worked in, yes, this was true. The black and brown neighborhoods were the poorest. So I just want to make that correction. And with that, I wanted to take a second to ask you, have you ever considered what really just makes you boil or enrages you to some degree? I thought about that one day early in my career when I was policing, and what really enraged me was the homeless begging. I remember we were on a detail and at a particular park, and we had to get the homeless up and out, moved out of the park, otherwise they would be arrested. And I remember this homeless guy, white guy, and he said to me, "Where do you want us to go?" And I was like, "Away from here." Remember, I told you I came with a bias against white men. I talk about it in other videos. So for him to ask me that, I was like, away from here. And, you know, they packed up and moved. And probably about 2 years later, I am in another part of the city, and I'm patrolling, and we catch this guy with heroin. He was mixed race, and of course we search him, put him on arrest, search him, and take the things out of his pocket. And he had this picture of George H. Bush and his wife. It looked like they were about to get on Air Force One or something like that. And the picture was old, it was wrinkled up. And I said, "Why do you have this picture?" He said, "I was on a detail that day and I happened to get a picture of them before they got on the Air Force One." So of course now I'm interested. I'm like, okay, let me talk to this guy. We're waiting for the wagon to come anyway. He was a veteran of the military, and he didn't tell me exactly what he was doing that day, but he said he was a part of a detail. But he was ex-military. And I said, "So why are you here? How did you get into this position?" Because he was homeless, he was on heroin, and being arrested by me. And he said that he was at one of those military parties or whatever, and trying to get with some woman. And instead of smoking what he thought was marijuana, it was marijuana laced with heroin. And he's been hooked ever since. And he said he's been going on it like 10 years. And I started to consider, keyword consider, like, wow, this man had a wife, children, great career, and then heroin, you know, he slipped down that rabbit hole. And he said he's been homeless at that time, I think about 2 or 3 years, and just chasing. He said that's that first high that you get, he said you continue to chase it. I've always heard that from different heroin users. And so I started to talk to the homeless as I encountered them. That's me considering. I started to talk to them, and a lot of them were vets. And I started to research the number of shelters and stuff like that, because I remember early in the career, remember the guy, the white guy, where are we gonna go? And there were 3 major shelters at the time that I knew about, but they were all filled to capacity. And every last homeless person that I've talked to since then always talked about the stuff that went on in there, and they just rather be out here, or they don't want to contact family because they put their family through so much because of the drug use, just different stories. And I started to consider that. And the reason why I bring up consideration is because in policing, when you're going through the training, you're taught to consider yourself under the guise of considering the community. I remember taking some training, self-defense training, and it was always make sure you go home at night, you know, win the battle. And I thought it was great. You know, I'm going to win this battle, whether it's a fight or shooting, I'm going to win the battle. But they never tell you to consider the other individual, because there's always a purple or a bad guy. And so with me and the homeless, you know, the sergeant gave the briefing that morning. We got to get out here, move these people out of the park because they're leaving mess, they're drugs and needles and da-da-da. And so I started to consider the homeless and the mindset and the many stories, most of them vets. They either don't want to go into the system, into the VA hospital because it takes so long. I've had my own experience with that and I just gave up. But I have a house to come back to. Some people give up and they just go to the street. There's so many variables with being homeless. You know, it used to just anger me when they would beg and, you know, come up to you and you see the same person the next day. But did I consider, okay, let's say they made $50 or $100 for the day. That's only going to get you maybe one night in a hotel. And yes, you do see those con artists. And again, through my faith, I don't worry about that. If the Holy Spirit says give it, I give it. And I'm not worried about what they're going to do with it. Are they going to go use drugs? That's between them and God after that. I have nothing to do with it. We're not going to be standing there on Judgment Day, homeless guy and me. Sharon, what do you think he did with the $25 you gave him? Jesus ain't going to ask me nothing about that. But I digress. Anyway, I started to consider, and that's what I wanted my message to be today, to consider, even with watching the state of things that are going on in the environment with policing, and you see the brutality. I'll say this one thing. In training, I've had a couple of thousand hours of training. And I remember every time we would go through a scenario like hands-on, once it came to the arrest, it was always end training, or what they say, end scenario. And I think we don't need to end scenario at the arrest when we're role playing, because a lot of officers have never fought a person in real life. And I had a lot of fights coming up in school. But once I got into the ring, a controlled environment in the academy, when they put that headgear on, when I tell you I was claustrophobic and my mind was going 1,000 places in a minute. And then my instructor's like, you know, you just got to breathe through it. No, I'm having a problem over here. But I tried to fight. I was fighting another female who happened to be a amateur boxer. But anyway, the claustrophobic mindset that I started to have in that moment, I couldn't even, I did try to protect myself, but again, I started to consider this when I went to arrest people, or, you know, in the height of chasing and you grab the individual and you're trying to get them in handcuffs. The different mindsets that are interacting in that moment is something to be mindful of. But getting back to the training, I remember fighting, and it's always end scenario. Think about this. When you see the officers whipping on somebody out there and they're punching them all in the head, a normal reaction is to protect yourself. If you have use of your arms, you're going to protect yourself. Somebody's hitting you in the head. Meanwhile, we're taught as officers, speak loud and tell them to comply. They can't comply if you're punching them in the head. What I used to do, get them on the ground, hit them right here in the kidney if they're still fighting, because now they got to protect the kidney, but I got the hand in back where I want. I can't keep hitting somebody in the head thinking they're going to comply. It reminded me of the 20-year-old, about 2 weeks ago. He's shot in the stomach. You're putting handcuffs on him and you're telling him, stop resisting. He's shot. He's shot. Okay, but anyway, ending the scenario at the arrest for officers in training, no. Let those mindsets kick in. Keep the scenario going. Have the officer or the role player buck up, as they call it, and see how many mindsets kick in, and you'll see the different levels of fear, if you will. Officer pulling this way, officer pulling that way. Get them on the ground, and then put your hand behind your back. but then there's 2 officers punching in the head. They need to keep that scenario going, because I think if officers went through that, then they would consider what they do a little bit more. Not saying it would end it, but I'm thinking they would consider, like, I can't be hitting this guy in the head thinking he's going to comply, because guess what? I have that memory of my training. I was getting hit in the head. I put my hands up so many times to protect myself from the female that I was fighting in training, and claustrophobic. She hit me so hard the headgear turned around. But I remember that when it came to the streets. I just want to share that little bit with you guys. Have you ever considered what enrages you? Have you ever sat and actually thought about it? I started to do that with the homeless guy and started to talk to the other homeless folks. And then as I policed, I didn't arrest homeless people unless they were doing something crazy like killing somebody. But other than that, I just want to share that little bit with you guys. Hit like, subscribe. We have an online store. The link is in the description. And always remember, guys, you don't necessarily have to go through a thing to learn from it. Talk to you later. Bye.